Hi there, and welcome to Quick Tips for Online Teaching. I'm your host, Jenna Camp, and today we're talking about Breakout Room Collaborative Strategy. It did not take me long to learn the many pitfalls that can happen when teachers send students into breakout rooms. Scholars don't always know or don't remember what to do once they get there, or they stay just as quiet and shy and non-talkative as they were in the main room. Or perhaps it goes the other way and scholars get off task and easily distracted. For teachers, some of the pitfalls include not knowing what was discussed really in the breakout rooms, because if we're popping in and out of the rooms, then we don't know what was discussed prior to our arrival or after our departure. And there's no easy way to provide any timely feedback on that discussion, and that's an important part of the learning process. So what I did to address this issue this year is to create a shared Google document that all my breakout room teams use and that I can see in real time as they're working on it. This is a screenshot of actually my period 5 class from this past week. This is a Google spreadsheet actually. It was week 6 of instruction. We were working on leadership traits. You can see at the top, I have identified the class period that this is, and that corresponds on the bottom. There's a different tab for each of my classes. That's to make it easier for me so that I have all of my classes in one spreadsheet. But for the classes, they're just looking at the one tab. I also have that tab color-coded, so you can see at the top here, period 5 is bright green, and that corresponds to my comment column, which is also bright green. It's the dominant color here, and that becomes really useful. My period 2 class, for example, is bright blue. So scholars immediately start to understand the color coding, and they know from that color if they're on the wrong tab or not. There are only 4 columns in this. It's a really simple spreadsheet. Breakout room, names and roles, what was discussed, and then a space for my comments. Row 5 can change, and in fact it does change depending on what the content of their table talk discussion is. I always start with the day and date. You can see this was from this past Tuesday, September 15th, 2020. Step 1 is always to fill in the names and roles, who is fulfilling which role. Down here in the yellow section, I have those roles listed and the responsibilities for each role. So even though I have pre-taught this to scholars and I remind them before I send them to breakout rooms, this is the same information written where they can see it and access it all the time. And the roles don't change. Always a facilitator to lead the discussion, a recorder to take notes, a reporter to share out in the main room, and a harmonizer to make sure that everybody is contributing. Notice here it says the top 3 roles must always be filled. So I never send groups smaller than 3 to a breakout room. My groups are typically 3 to 4, sometimes 5. We can have an extra harmonizer if necessary. But I always want to make sure there's a facilitator, a recorder, and a reporter. Then step 2 is to talk about. This is the prompt. And again, I put the prompt in here. Now my table talk discussions are always a discussion on the journal prompt I just had them do in their ticket in the door. So scholars have already had a chance to think about this, and typically they have something to say already, so they're not waiting in some kind of a quiet limbo figuring out what to say. This final cell here, D5 cell, this is where I provide either some more information. So in this case, the prompt that they were discussing was referencing this Pew Research, and I needed to give them those leadership traits that they could talk about. I didn't expect them to have that memorized. I wanted them to be able to quickly access that. Sometimes I'll use this for sentence frames, and that's another really handy strategy for English learners, well, for all students really. So I might have a sentence frame there that says, I agree with, or I disagree with so-and-so because yada, yada, yada. This down here, though, is where it gets brilliant for me, because I can now see all 5 or 6 teams in breakout rooms in real time at the same time on the same document. And I can tell who's on task, who's lollygagging about, who has any kind of a question or seems to be confused. And I can immediately identify who is the facilitator, reporter, and I just write down the breakout room number and the reporter's name on a sticky note, so that when we get right back into the main room, I can immediately call on my reporters and we're wasting less time. Also, when they're making their notes, I can read those and provide some critical thinking questions, some deeper questions for analysis, or I can ask for clarity. If I notice they're off task, I can prompt them to get on task. It's a really handy way all at once, and I'm not wasting all that time popping in and out of breakout rooms, which seems to take a long time. So the other thing I want to remind you of is to not forget about the need for predictability and empowerment, especially during these times. But the more you can establish routines and be consistent with them, the better for scholars. For example, my scholars know that every Tuesday is ticket in the door plus table talk. And they know that the ticket in the door is a journal prompt and that the table talk is a breakout room discussion of that journal prompt. Giving some scholars the opportunity for empowering themselves and choosing perhaps who to work with in the breakout rooms also really helps them. That voice and choice encourages better student participation. For more quick tips for online teaching, please check out www.jennacamp.com or find me on Facebook or Instagram at Jenna Camp Educational. Thanks so much for sharing.